So I think given the times that we're living in, a storyteller never dies. A storyteller is there. I think their role will never be shifted by AI, considering that the very idea why stories are created and why they are told, you know, humans need that. It's for the humans. So it's not like we're going to create great stories and suddenly AI is going to consume the content. AI can never feel the way human does. So I think the question more so would be that how, in an age where AI can help us create stories, and of course AI is readily helping us with not just the creation part but then also the editing part, then how can human beings respond to those stories? So I think this is the question, and I think a storyteller by heart, a person who is great at telling stories, a person who constructs stories, observes the stories in his own life and then create a bigger story for people to see. I'm talking about filmmakers, writers, artists. So I think it has nothing to do with them. They have that passion, they have that observation, human observation, and human observation is not going anywhere. And considering the fact that human observation is such a unique thing, it can be a simple scene, but one human sees different thing, another human sees something else. Now AI cannot see that because AI doesn't have a soul or a heart. AI can only look into data archives and codes and can run on multiple algorithms to see what is available already by those human beings in those archives, and then can construct something entirely unique, which, if you actually think about it, it's not that unique. It's just like a cut, copy, paste of a lot of different things coming together in the form of a collage. So you can say that yes, what AI is doing, it's a collage of different thought processes, different human beings, and what they thought about certain things coming together. But AI is not creating something out of scratch. And since AI is unable to do that as of today, so we can say safely that human beings cannot be taken over by AI or robots or whatever. So because AI, as I said, it's so good at just writing, it's so good at creating perfection, I think it's missing on the errors. AI is very bad at keeping that human touch. AI is so bad at bringing that human element or that mistakes that makes us connect with something and say that, oh, this was made by a human being. And the more we're reaching towards perfection, whether it's a perfect script, whether it's a perfect email, a perfect contract, or in fact a perfect design, because I'm an artist and designer, so even a visual, when we seek the perfection, I think that the rawness, the strokes, the loose lines, they become more important. They become more important because they are a reminder that we are human beings and we crave that human touch in whatever that we see, in whatever that we feel. And of course, the paintings, that's why they hold such importance, because even when the camera came with all the new technologies, new equipment that we're now using in the name of art, we have still decided that paintings need to coexist, and there is a reason. Because what paintings bring to the table, photography can never do. Yes, photography has brought new potential. Photography and filmmaking has brought new mediums for us to express ourselves, but this doesn't mean that that very essence from where we actually started to express, the very idea how human beings started to express themselves, that hasn't changed. That is still there. In fact, that's only growing. So storyteller can have multiple mediums, but a storyteller, whoever that person is by heart, they remain the same. I think a great story starts with the emotion, or at least a great story is making sure that whoever is connecting with that story, because again, a story can have multiple audiences, whether it's for a tech audience, whether it's a younger audience, but they all require an emotion for them to relate to it, right? So we can't separate an emotion from a story. I think they go hand in hand, whether that's the process of creation, whether that's the spectacle, whether it's the people who are viewing. I think there has to be an emotional range. There has to be this emotional connection. And sometimes it doesn't have to be one emotion. So this is one thing. It doesn't have to be, okay, so if I wanted an angry reaction out of something, then the audience is supposed to be angry while watching it. No. Sometimes you just let it flow. You gave your emotion, whatever you were feeling, and you were channeling it through your practice, through your outlet, through that form of art, but doesn't mean that your audience needs to be reacting on that work of art in the same way. They can have their own emotion. And for instance, just to give you an example, if you created something out of anger, it might be even therapeutic for yourself, because you were pouring in the anger, but it doesn't show on the canvas. Maybe it's so colorful. And in fact, the audience that sees, they don't pick on your anger. Right? So the process of human creativity has a lot of emotional ranges, and emotion mapping, that's why it's so important. How do we map our emotions? How conscious we are about our emotions while we are creating, constructing storylines, while we are talking about a character's journey throughout a film. And that's why the stories that have characters transform throughout the film, they hit very differently, because then suddenly we see their human side. For example, if there's a character that was quite violent, quite aggressive, and they are turning into a quite peaceful person, then you see their emotional or human element in that, and that's what connects to us. So I think you can never separate the stories with emotions. Yes and no, because I think it cannot, because again, if we are using AI, why do we use AI? Who are the people who are using AI? Those are the people who might not possess the skill to draw, for example. Because someone who likes to draw, even when they're creating something with AI, they will have this urge to go and fix it. And I have experienced this myself. I will not even find that perfect. I will go and I will try to fix, just to bring my own touch to it. Perhaps it's just to bring my own touch. Perhaps it's just to add that one thing so that I can say this is my work of art. I don't know. But you are never satisfied. And therefore, who are the people then who are using AI? They don't have the skill. So I think it can provide them therapy, because suddenly AI is giving them this extra outlet to express themselves. Before that, they didn't think it was possible to create their imagined realities as a physical reality. So I think in that way, I consider AI is such an empowering tool for people who might not have the limbs, might not have the hands to do the job, right? Okay, and another example is if someone is blind, they can't even see the world, right? They have thoughts, they have imagined things. How do they express themselves? This is AI is just bridging that. AI is bridging a lot of people who are, having these kind of reality, and there are so many people who do face that. So how do they connect with the world? How do they express? So I think for them, it's therapeutic. I think storytellers can do their job. I mean, to be honest, storytellers have a very specific role in all of this, right? If a storyteller is using AI, for example, just to iterate an idea, just to say, okay, let's brainstorm on this thought process that I had, let's see the potential of it, right? Then it's fine. They can sit, they can browse 20 different ideas, but at the end of the day, you as a human being are going to choose one out of them, or perhaps ask 20 more ideas. Now, this is your human brain that is curating thoughts. You are the curator now. So it's not this idea that suddenly your work is being done. What you have to see is a more of a leadership role. Now you have a leadership role in the sense that you think that there are 20 people who created 20 versions for you. There is a team who did all of that for you. And you as a person who is going to take this idea forward, which one would you prefer to choose so that then you can move forward from that? It's not more so, okay, so AI has done the job, now my work is done, and whatever was created is good enough. No, it's never good enough. You can always improve on it. And that's your job. And that's your decision. So don't lose the power where you are the decider and where you have to make the decisions of whatever project, whatever thing that you're doing. The decision still remains with you. AI is just cutting out all the trash work for you, and it's just helping you fast forward on the brainstorming, mind mapping, sometimes a lot of different things coming together because decision making is hard. So it's just cutting out all that thing so that you can focus more on your real project. I think it depends on how AI was used. See, if there is a work of art, if there is this video or film or whatever that was entirely done with AI, right? And it shows that it's done with AI, then even while you're watching it, even if it's a good piece of work, somehow it would trigger you that, okay, this is AI. Like this would be the first thought that comes to you. So you can't connect further with it because there was not a human being that made it. Even if it looks so nice, even if the visuals are appealing, even if you have all those elements, the cinematic going on, there is fashion, there is lighting, there is curation, somehow you are unable to connect. So I think it again depends on how it was directed. The process matters. It's not just that the fact that, okay, you use 3 AI tools and you've created something. It depends on the fact that whether it was hybrid model, whether it was done half actual production and then half was taken to AI, whether it was done in a way that there was a green screen and then you shot something and then there were AI visuals layered and then perhaps it was animated so gracefully that you can't actually tell where the AI started, where the human usage ended. And it's blending so naturally that you are not focused on the technique. You are focused on the story. You are focused on what emotion that story is bringing. And then I think that is a successful work of art where you can't actually tell whether it was AI or not. It's more so about the story. And I think if you can pick on that, whatever you are viewing, and you can actually try and test it when you're viewing any kind of content online, and if you think that it's grabbing your emotion, and it's not making you think whether it was done by AI or human, then I think that is a successful work of art, whether it was completely done by AI or whether it was completely done by human. I think this is the important bit. And therefore, again, we as storytellers come into play. So with current films, the way animation is being done, we have seen in Pakistan Glass Worker, it took them many years to come to that point where they decided to work on a hand made film, and then they did it. Usman's vision, I spoke to him about that. And then also keeping in mind that how Japanese animation has flourished, anime has flourished. We have seen certain styles in animation evolve, right? And if you go and study the history of animation, there was a time when even the way each frame was done, it was hand drafted. There was no tools for animation, and it was all done through very analog equipment, right? And then we have seen softwares coming in. They're taking the effort. They're taking all the effort, and they're asking us to put our effort in the stories, in constructing a story that matters, right? So if I keep this information in mind for a second, and then I talk about what's happening now, from that lens, if I see, then I think it's fine. It's fine. I'm fine with the fact that if AI can do all of that, right? Then the thing or the question or the bigger thing is, then how do we bring value through our process? So let's say if my animation is still, if I decide that no, that I still want to work on an animation where each frame is going to be hand drafted, handmade, I don't want any AI, I don't want any machine, then where does it stop? Are you saying that you're also not going to use softwares for the edit? Like where do you draw that line? And if you're saying that the process itself brought the value, right? Then are you saying that based on the story and whatever thing is happening in your film, that is not the greater purpose, but the process of making it was the greater purpose? I mean, that's the question mark. And again, another question that can arise from this is that during all this, the bigger challenge here, I think, of today's time is that how sustainable you are. Not only in the fact that which equipment or which tools you are using. Of course, you have to count the entire carbon footprint, not just the carbon footprint which was done through an AI software, but also count the carbon footprint in general while creating any work of art. through the process, like what was the equipment, how much energy has been used, how much waste was produced, how to recycle that. Like if you're not conscious about that in your project, and this thing, people have now more consciousness about this in the textiles industry, not so much in film industry. So people just attack on AI, saying that, oh, the carbon footprint is coming from AI. I agree, but again, are we counting the entire carbon footprint, or are we just counting the little usage of AI perhaps that you did, and you're saying, oh, that's why I'm not doing it? This is not a good enough reason for me. So we have to be very mindful what we are trying to say. And we have to think today, how can we bring value? What does value even mean? How do we define value today? Because today's definition of value is quite different from the definition of value that we used to have in previous times. So I think the times have changed, and so has the definition itself. So we can't really say it. It depends on a lot of different things. We don't have to rely on AI ever, just like how we don't rely on our camera. We don't say that, okay, we have this camera, so let's shoot this kind of a film. We don't say that. We say, what was the vision? I don't think a filmmaker thinks about the equipment first. I don't know any such filmmaker who says that, okay, because I have this level of equipment. Yes, to a certain extent, it matters that you can do big productions with better equipment, and you can't do the same level of storytelling with very basic equipment. But again, having said that, sometimes you can create great work of art with limited resources that you have. And that's my point, that we should not think about what AI is capable of and whether we should be using AI for that or not, how much we can rely on. It's about your usage and how you show that usage. If it was intelligently done, you don't have to say that it's AI or not. It's just another tool, and you have used it successfully to create your idea into a vision that anyone enjoys. In today's time, the issue is not this, that am I using AI or am I not using AI, how much AI is being used. It's about whether you are successful to grab the attention of audience with what you have created. Because there's so much content online. So much is being produced, not just for Netflix, not just for Amazon Prime, but Instagram, TikTok, everyone has a channel. So you are competing with everyone. You are not just competing with Netflix anymore. People don't go and see Netflix films. People are going and they check on every small reel by their favorite influencer. This is the level of competition that we have. So in today's time, the value is of the attention, and attention is a currency. So wherever the attention is going to flow, money is going to flow. So we don't have to think about the AI. AI is not the scary bit here. The bigger issues, what is being told through stories, what is the content, what is the message, these are still the questions. So if you have very bad content and it was shot on a 4K best camera, so do you think it's a reasonable content? I think these are the bigger questions that we need to have. If someone is doing very educational thing through AI just because they have access to AI, and AI is making their life easier to create a platform, I think they're doing a better job. Again, I've seen how current schools, colleges, they are creating policies around how much AI can be used. This should be done through AI, but this should not be done through AI. Again, maybe they can have a different strategy, but I think that universities especially, because that's where students are working on their research papers and dissertations and bigger projects, which are much more serious. I'm not saying that younger students don't do that. But my point is that you should allow them the usage of AI, but we're living in an era where, the people who know the most are not going to win anymore. There was a time for that, and that we have passed that era. People who know the most doesn't matter, because education, knowledge is accessible, is everywhere, and it's abundant. You don't have to search that archive to find that theory anymore. You don't have to go to Europe to that specific library to learn about a subject anymore. Everything is available to everyone. So, knowing the most doesn't matter. Knowing what matters, when it matters, is the question. So AI, and this is one scary bit of AI, that it's creating a lot of information at such a quick pace that somehow the original information, the original thought process of people are getting diluted in the way, right? So we can't actually do the demarcation where the where there was an original information, and now where the information coming from AI is coming and mixing everything, right? Because I see a lot of mix online. Like, even if you search actual research papers, what shows up is people's public chat GPT feeds. And I mean, someone needs to go and speak to these people that, hey, if someone is trusting you with their thoughts, come on, at least not put it out, right? But OpenAI keeps on changing their terms and conditions. So I mean, it's on their white paper, but they're already, updating it each and every time. And that's a separate debate entirely. But my point is that for students, now the important skill is, in class they need to be taught adaptation. They need to be taught how to construct an argument in a small time frame. I think this is one skill that this generation needs. They are unable to do it. They have zero coping mechanisms. When they are given a stress, they fail. They struggle. So I think these are the core skills which weren't even taught to us in our generation. But somehow we learned ourselves. I think this was a learned behavior, considering the fact that time we were growing up, technology wasn't that accessible, and we had to learn it. So, I think it was an evolutionary trait in us. However, for the Gen Z, they will struggle more because the access is more. And now they're not going to use their own capacity, their own brains, and rely on that to sustain the information that is coming. They don't sustain. What they think is, if the education is available on a click, just because we have internet access, then we don't have to remember it. Now, remembering itself is a skill, and so that's why they avoid it. I think education system needs to just accept the fact that we don't need to learn for the sake of learning anymore. We don't need to sit and learn tables that much, other than the basic ones. We don't need to learn how to solve word problems. We don't need to sit and learn these organic chemistry equations anymore, right? That knowledge is available if someone wants to do it. They have a DIY project, which is hardly the case most of the time, because not the rest of the students are going to take chemistry, right? Except for a few who might become the scientist in, whatever chemistry they are doing. So a lot of the way education is being taught is redundant. And therefore, I'll come back to my point, which is the core skills: critical thinking, basic learning, human brain cognition. We have to activate these centers somehow. They should not be passive. And if they are passive, then, the bigger concerns arise. Then students cannot actually deal with the issues of their real life. And real issues like, families, their work life, their ambitions, their vision, they actually fall behind on those, because they are unable to construct a plain sentence in their mind regarding that. They don't have the critical thinking to criticize their own thoughts, to say, okay, this is not a good idea, let's do this. To say that, okay, I thought that this was doable, but now it's not, so, it backfired, so I can't sustain anymore, I'm having depression. They don't have a coping mechanism. And that's highly because of the use of technology, not just AI. That has a lot to do with mindless scrolling that we do every day. That has a lot to do with things readily available to us. That has a lot to do with a lot of choices that we have now. The more choices that we have, the less we have to think. And the more choices that we have, the lesser time we have to give time to each thing, which means we get bored more easily. So in a time where everything is available, we still get bored. We think that we don't have enough stimulation and we want now something new. This idea of something new, I mean, in previous generation, if they had what we had, which they do now, so their reaction to and their relationship with technology is not that bad. How much we are suffering, like the current generation and Gen Z, how much they are suffering. Millennials didn't suffer like that. They didn't rely on the evolution of technology. We are relying on technology. And that's why this is so dangerous for a human brain, because human brains are designed to live very naturally. To even when the times are not right, even when we don't like something on a TV, we need to sit and we have to watch that because there are not many channels there. But now we just open our phones and there are endless channels. So why should we sit in front of our TV? You know? So in a time, again, when everything is available, education system needs to encourage students early on in their lives to find what they want to study. There is no point in wasting time. And studies show that a human brain develops by the age of 7 completely. Completely. And we think that a 7-year-old doesn't know anything. Now, if you think about that, then everything else that we're doing post the age of 7 years is actually a repetition of what we learned till the age of 7. Now, it's a very important fact, but no one knows that. We think that, oh, the life is starting after 20 and now we have time till 30 to decide what we want. No, you know very early on what you're good at. If we pay focus and if we pay attention to that. And in that, I think there needs to be role of parents, more awareness in general, and to bring exposure for that kid. And now once you know what their inclination is, whether it's words, whether it's they are going towards the sports or whatever that kid's inclination is, you just help them move in that direction. And of course, then a lot of people will say that, oh, by the age of 7, don't you think they're still very young? And because we're not trained that way, right? And we don't have the systems that can help us, let the kid go through multiple exposures and decide what they want. So that's understandable. But my point is that if even till teenagers, you know what you want, and the school is designed in the way that whatever you have decided, you want to contribute to that. So maximum you want to learn in that so that you can contribute to that. So the education system needs to be supporting you on your journey. And how can education system do that? By making you go through a case study based education. So in Pakistan, mostly, no one knows about case study until and unless you are going for medical studies, then only Aga Khan teaches that way of study, which is case study. So they teaches you through multiple cases for each student. They obviously they have different patients, their profiles, and then see, okay, what was their disease and, how did they overcome, and then they learn through that. Now, why case study is important and it's interesting, and why this is a better way of teaching than regular learning, and then you are trying to memorize stuff. Why case studies are better? I'll tell you. Because case studies are stories of real people. It's just like a film. When you read something, when you treat it as a very humane subject, then it becomes easier for you to digest material. It brings context to it. If it's just like some random paragraphs, you're told to learn, it becomes hard for you. If you're told that this was a story, an actual person went through it, and this is how this person resolved that issue, now you have the entire journey. So this way, it becomes easier for you to contextualize and see yourself in those and learn from it, rather than some very loose theories here and there, and you will never retain it. Even if you read it, you're never going to retain it. So that's the difference, and that's something that the education system needs to adapt. So in case of literature, let me clarify. It is there and it's not there. I mean, it's there in the sense that, yes, you are interacting with a lot of stories, right? But are they making you learn or go through the journeys of great literary artists, poets? No. This would be a case study if they taught this way. Because the subject itself has stories, I mean, poetry and all this interesting content, no. The way it's taught, I'm talking about the research and the teaching methodology. So when we talk about the teaching methodology, it has to be a case study method, because then you can retain a lot of more information. So when we talk about visualization, visualization is not a subject where we say, okay, just because we have a few visuals, we are doing successful visualization. No, visualization is a process. It's a constant to and fro process. You decide that you want something, you sit with it, and perhaps you have to come back from it because it doesn't work. So think about visualization as a journey with your own self where you are bringing clarity to your own thoughts. Our thoughts, it's like a jumbled up thing in our minds. We think 1000 ideas in a day, but not necessarily all of them are good for us. So we have to learn to filter them, and we have to learn which one will move in the direction of the vision that we see for ourselves in the future. That's where the visualization comes in. So when you know where you are heading, that's when you'll visualize firstly in your mind. You'll sit down, you'll close your eyes, and you'll think about a version of yourself in the future. You'll see how they walk, how they talk, how they perform, and then you're going to reverse engineer from there. From there, you would know that, okay, if this is the end product, you have seen it vividly. And by the way, when you're doing the visualization, you can take help of some image that you think this can be you. It can be a physical attire that you can hold, or perhaps you can create a Pinterest board out of it. Sometimes it helps people to understand what the vision of this entire thing is, and it's great for corporations. CEOs rely on it. In fact, they see sometimes visions. Entrepreneurs do that. Successful athletes do that, even if they're like top athletes. Before going, they visualize they're winning in the pitch, and they win. So there is a clear link with the more vivid your visualizations get to how successful the manifestation is going to be. So visualization is directly proportional to manifestation, in short. And therefore, you have to become really good at visualization. Now, this is again a skill in itself. You can't just say, okay, but I got a vision. This is what I want. No, it's not good enough. You have to feel the emotion of it. So if you see a version of yourself in future who is doing all these amazing things, what is that person thinking? How is that person feeling? You have to feel that energy now. You have to bring that energy in you. You have to feel that. And that's how it becomes real for you. Once it becomes real for you, then it becomes easier. You are halfway there. Because you have visualized it so in depth that now you have quantum leaped into your future. It's just like that you are here in present, and there is a future version. Now there is a distance, there is time, and there is distance, right? And if you quantum leap by visualization, by bringing that energy, by vibrating higher and feeling that energy now, then your energy feeds into your frequency. And once your frequencies are fed, which is on a very energetic level, you suddenly know yourself what is your next step to achieve that successful version. See, our brains are quite intelligent. It doesn't know the difference between what we are experiencing and what we are imagining. So in a way, you can say our brains are quite dumb in that department. I listen to Dr. Joey Dispenza a lot and his methods of visualization, and I've used them for my projects planning. I've used them for my future projects that I would like to do. I do daily visualizations and daily manifestations, and I've learned that it's a skill in itself, right? So manifestation and visualization goes hand in hand. You can say if like the journey from 1 to 10, 1 to 5 is visualization, and then 5 to 10 is manifestation. So if you have done successfully visualized, meaning you are sure what you want. See, half of the people on this planet, I don't think they know what they want. And they struggle. They struggle to believe. They struggle to talk to themselves. They struggle to say it out loud what they really want. So once you know what you really want, you are halfway there. Now you have to just work to achieve it. And sometimes what people are doing, they are in a routine, they're doing all those things, and yet they have this inside, they have this calling. They know what they want. What they were meant to be was something else. Yet they're not doing any action to work around it. And that's so sad because people will never know their potential this way. So that's why I say that design thinking, visualization, manifestation, they're so important, more so for creatives, because they are going to create something that can only be imagined by other peoples. So a visual artist, a filmmaker, they bring ideas to reality. So manifestation and visualization. So if you are stuck in a job, you don't know any way out. I'm not a professional myself to be saying that, but I made a decision early on in my life that I don't want to do a job. I want to become a part of the process that I believe in. And that process is going to take me time. So for starters, I think just sit with yourself, take a paper, and write 10 things you think you are good at and you want to do. So once you have a list of the things that you want to do, things that you would like to do, you take it from there. You see that how important those are. Then you prioritize. Okay, this is something that I would love to do. This is not, okay, this is not on my priority. It's as simple as that. And if you're already not doing that, then something is wrong. Then you need to think about quitting, but then also not quitting drastically. Think about the transition, think about your future goals and how your current scenario. So this is important. Don't let your mind, come into this decision making that, okay, now whatever you're going through, leave it. No escaping. We are not going into the escaping mindset. We are going to think, okay, we have visualized this amazing person, this amazing version of myself, which is in the future, who has achieved great things. Now, given my scenario, I am this person right now. What can I do one thing today that can take me one step forward to that person? It's like you're having this conversation with your future self. Okay, you are there. So what would you suggest me? And in this, obviously, you can take help from mentors, you can do a lot of research and all of that. But I think our brains are so intelligent, they know. They know what you have to do today. So you can take inspiration from other people, but your brains are the most intelligent and they can also be the most dumb because they don't know what is reality and what is imagined. So we have to make a use of it. So for any person who wants to do the manifestation, the first step is visualization. Forget about the manifestation. You have to really think about how to bring your ideas to reality. And for that, you have to sit with yourself. You need to have those awkward moments. You need to have those hard conversations with yourself. So sit with yourself, close your eyes, and think about a version that is very vivid. It should feel very real. It should not feel disconnected. It should not feel that this is something that you cannot achieve. It should feel like this is a version that definitely exists in the future. And for that to happen, you have to perhaps sit with a paper. You have to write on it what are the 10 things that you would want to do or you are doing and you love to do, but haven't been able to channel into something bigger. So these are the hard questions that you have to ask yourself first. And once you are comfortable with yourself, because most of the people will not have this audacity to sit with themselves. They can have this audacity to go to 9 to 5 and give all their life to someone else's vision. But they won't have the audacity to give themselves some time and space to actually do the hard work of getting to know yourself. We all say that this person didn't find the time to know me. We get offended. We get offended that why our friends don't want to know us. We get offended when someone is not giving us time, the due attention that we think we deserve, whether it's a formal discussion, whether it's with friends. But how come we never get offended on this very idea that we are not able to give ourselves those time? We need to be more offended on this. And in fact, we need to work aggressively on this. We need to be very selfish about our time and where we put our time, because time is all we have. So when you sit and give yourself this time, don't think that, okay, you need to come up with an answer within this time frame. You have to just sit with those ideas, whatever chaotic ideas that you have, and just think about a version. And this is the thing about the vision. Why we say it's a vision? It just comes to you. You don't have to construct something that is quite luxurious, that is quite glamorous. No, it just has to speak to you. You have to close your eyes, and 99% of the time, the version that you would want yourself to be, it's already there in your mind. You don't have to create that version. However, I can debate that you can actually 10x or 100x on that vision, very vision that you saw, and make it brighter, bigger. Because perhaps that vision that you're seeing, it's a blurred out vision. It is there, you can almost see it, but it's not that great. So how do you make it great? You have to work on it, you have to scale it up. You have to think, okay, if I'm thinking about writing one book, perhaps I should think about writing 5 books in next 3 years. This is where the ambition comes in. But if you don't even know that you have to become a writer, how does one even channel your thoughts? How does one channel even their skills? So the first step is you get to know yourself. You see that blurred image, you try to clear all the fog, and then you scale it up. Once you have that scaled vision in you and you visualize it, now you have to create a visualization board of it. Now, what is a visualization board? Visualization board is a collage of different images that you find on internet, perhaps you can find on magazines, and then you put those things together and now it becomes more real. Whenever you forget what your vision was, you can always come back to it. It becomes a reminder that this is who you are. It's just a proof for yourself. No one needs to make any sense of that. Only you need to make sense of that. And that's the beauty of visualization. Now, once you have there and you constantly see this image, you can do this while you are sleeping every night, before sleeping. That is a mode when you are half asleep, you are half subconscious, your mind is trying to relax. You can see that beautiful picture that you painted for your own self. It's in your mind. No one has to see it. And it's a goal. You don't have to share with anyone. It's just yours to see. And it's yours to believe. So if you don't believe it and if you get rid of it, then it's your loss entirely. It's no one else's fault, basically. So these are the 3 steps that one has to do, and never put this on anyone. It's your own fault if you're not following it through and if you think that this is not good enough. Because obviously the struggles are going to come in. And one tip that I would give for anyone who is trying to visualize, don't just visualize the pretty parts of it. Visualize all the struggles that you're going to go through it. Because that actually preps your mind. So let's say if you're seeing only the beautiful picture, this person that exists, who is not facing any issues, and once that some little thing comes in your life that is becoming a struggle for you, then you are like, okay, this manifestation is not working out for me. This visualization is definitely not working out for me. Because you only prepped your mind into thinking that this beautiful version exists on the other end, and I'm going to quantum leap into that based on this fact that it's just going to be easy. No. Think about all the struggles that your future self that you imagined is going to face. Now you have to visualize them as well. And then visualize, and this is how you get better at visualizing. You have to then visualize your future self going through those issues successfully. Think about 10 possible struggles that can come to you if you want to, for example, become a great writer who has to publish 5 books in next 3 years. Then what are the issues? Write those 10 issues, because there are going to be issues. We live on planet Earth. Every human being goes through issues. So you have to write those issues. Now you have to create 10 different versions of you, of that self, that are going through those issues. Now once your brain is prepped and its defenses are not up, it has let its defenses down, because the mind doesn't know if it's reality or if it's imagined. So the mind is already prepared. Now mind knows that these are the struggles that are going to come in. So don't feel that something is happening to you particularly. Now your brain is prepped, and then it becomes easy. Then once that process starts, you won't even have to look back. It will happen automatically. Things will start to fall into place automatically. So these are the points that people miss about manifestation, about visualization, that we think that if we have visualized something, it has to become real. No, it's a process. And sometimes your visualization and manifestation changes every day. So learn to journal your thoughts, learn to bring some kind of diagram or visual to your thoughts. This brings clarity and reduces the fog. And this is the process of visualization. I think there will be, and it's a popular opinion that people will say that focus on one thing. I've heard this a lot. I've heard this many times now. And to be honest, I've never found a logic of it. I'll give you a reason why. Because great entrepreneurs, they always have something on the side. Now, I'm not saying it's directly a second business. It can be a second hobby that is feeding into their main work, right? Maybe the world sees it as a second work, but that person who is successful see that as a hobby. Now, it's a change of perspective. What I would debate is, don't think about goals. Think about loose ideas that you want to achieve. And whether it's a day, whether those goals are something that you want to achieve in a day, or whether those are the goals that you would want to achieve in a year, the rule applies, similarly. Now, the rule says that if you know what are the goals, loosely, that these are the things that you want to achieve, over a year, over a period of time, whatever that time is, write it down for your own clarity if that helps. But that's not necessarily a good idea. Because then your brain thinks that, oh, I was given a task and now I have to fulfill this task within this timeline. And if that doesn't happen, then I have to be the failure. I am the failure because I actually thought this was doable. And then mind goes into this rut. So in order to avoid that, keep loosely your ideas and then let them flow. Now, this is where the beauty of multitasking comes in. If you have more than one thing going on, if one thing is not working out for you, you can always fall back on the other. Now, this doesn't mean that you start like 5 different businesses who are not connected to each other and they have no link to your own truth, to the person that you are. Now it's a failure. If you do it, then it's a disaster. Make sure you are thinking about a roadmap. So on a road, if there are 5 things, they all need to be on the same road. They are all linked through one road. That's why it's called a roadmap. I'm not talking about a mind map. I'm talking about a roadmap. Now, the roadmap means that in your mind, you know that this thing is going to feed into that, and then that thing is going to feed into this one. In your mind, the roadmap is already there. People will not see it. People can't see and people won't see the logic behind it, but you have that in your mind. And that's the important thing. No one needs to understand it. Now, a roadmap, how you design it, it's very simple. As some CEOs, some entrepreneurs, how they do it, it's, because they have a mindset for monetization, they have a mindset for innovation. They say that, for example, I can share my own experience. I got interested in stories and writing words that matter, basically. So I was like, how can I monetize that? How can I create meaning, or how can I do something around it? Like, I'm this person who loves to work with words that matter. What can I do about it now? Now, someone can say, okay, but you are an artist. Why are you not in your studio and you're not painting? And someone else can say, okay, I saw you at a conference last year. Now, why are you not doing conferences anymore? Suddenly, there is a disconnect. So, should I just get, blunt, and should I just say, oh, but you don't understand me? No, this is not a good answer. The real answer to this is, in my mind, it makes sense why I'm doing what I'm doing, because it's planned, because I know what is feeding into what. And just to give you an example on that is, first of all, I write my words. I read what I would like to become, because words make us. So I understand the value of words, so I go and I read. Okay, first thing is done. Now, if something inspires me, I see a loophole, I say, okay, what if something was done with this mindset, but it's not written yet? Now, suddenly I got an idea for a mini script, for example. Now I think about, because I have skill in video, I have skill in art, I have a skill in, some fashion stuff. I say, okay, how can I then use this material into a bigger project? Now, this is a pipeline. This is a pipeline that I have figured out for myself. How one thing leads into other and then, further. And then you can use and repurpose the same content. So for me, it works. So if I have some same material, in those time periods, because I know I love creating a small mini collection of fashion, and then I do prints and artworks around it. So suddenly everything is easy. Now for my own artworks, for my next exhibition, I don't have to come up with a new idea. Why? Because I knew what matters to me today. Because I know what matters to me today, what are the ideas that I'm researching these days. Based on those ideas, based on my own research that I'm doing these days, I will use the same statement or content, and I will, repurpose them into different pipelines. Now, one pipeline is my designs, the other pipeline is my art. So me as a human being, I didn't change. I didn't say, okay, I'm going to create a third business. In my mind, it all makes sense. It's part of the same roadmap, but they're just like different pipelines. I'm repurposing my content from here to here, from here to here. So I know that within this year, it's going to be easy because this version of me that is today is interested in these ideas. And if this version is interested in these ideas, then automatically, if it's coming out of me, whether it's designs, whether it's whether it's paintings, is going to reflect that. And sometimes you can see that patterns very clearly through the usage of color. Now, this is a very you can say visible way you can tell that how this person is feeling. Suddenly, if you start to wear black, for example, and your canvases are becoming black, right, then you are in a different phase of your life, right? And suddenly, if you see colors in your outfits that you're designing, and you're talking about colors in your poetry or whatever you're writing, and then you see those same colors and that same sensibility in the way you're painting things, this is what I'm talking about. You don't change yourself. You are this one person. So whatever is going to come out, those are just different pipelines. Don't think that, okay, I can't do this and this. Yes, you have to manage them. You can't compromise one thing for the other. So you don't take on work, more than you can handle, right? So be sensible about it. But in your mind, if things are connected, then it doesn't have to make sense to anyone else. That's my point. So in my student years, there was a very strange color palette, I would say. For some reason, all my canvases were red. Now, I still don't understand why so much red was there in my, thesis paintings. Except for one or two paintings, all of my paintings were very dark. They were stark. There was neonish pink and there was red. So, and then after that, I was creating a bunch of work, which was when Dark Skies Gaze Back project I was doing. So then I was working with stars at that time. And then I was also looking at the idea of darkness. So I think I became very conscious about light for some reason. And I was just like, let's just go black. And I remember, wearing a lot of black outfits, even on my openings and stuff. Like, I was literally wearing black, and all my canvases were black. So I think we all have our phases in that sense. And then now, if I think about it, then I think I've been exploring more colors other than red, other than black. And I've been looking into teals and a lot of sea greens in my work, in the patterns that I design. So I think it's a phase, but you can say that as an artist, darker colors have always spoken to me more, like rich purples, burgundies, reds, maroons, blacks, metallics is my ultimate go-to palette. However, I've been like experimenting and seeing what works for me. So in my mind, this is also very close to nature. It's just that AI was used. Yes, I was exploring the usage of AI and seeing whether AI can actually help me visualize things that I perhaps don't have the resources to do in the time that I have. Right. So this was the reason why I opted to work with AI. As someone who enjoys visuals, I love to be part of the process as much as possible. And if AI can help me, explore a different domain of my imagined characters or imagined visuals, then why not? I was like, yeah, I would really want to try it. But I think that my work has always been inspired by nature, whether directly or indirectly. So even Dark Skies Gaze Back project was concerned, or you can say connected to nature in a very different way, which was environmental, which was for the audience, which was for the public. I was thinking largely. I was zooming out my lens and I was like looking at the environment, how that is being affected, how we are becoming visible, like the bigger ideas, light pollution, usage of light. Of course, COVID was there, so we were all indoors and we were not having enough sunshine. So, those were the ideas, those were the concerns. Mental health was the concern, depression, metabolism, all these things, which are universal issues. Not something that I, as an individual, was facing. I was thinking about the bigger, thing which was happening at that time. Obviously, at that time, I didn't think about myself. I think it was quite natural for me to transition into that state because, it was quite a dark period. We were listening about a lot of deaths and all, and suddenly my palette was black. So I didn't plan that. I think it's artists are very sensitive. So I was very sensitive to colors. I didn't want to use many colors. So everything was metallic, everything was black in that project. In fact, I became super conscious to the use of color and how color was being picked on and shown in my digital prints as well. So I think that AI and all these recent explorations, they are just experimental. I might pursue it, I might not pursue it. I like the fact that it brings possibilities. AI brings possibilities, but I don't like the fact when it's becoming too AI visuals, which I hate. So I'm trying to find that balance, which tool can give me, and how can I take my tangible or my drawings, my sketches, and link them with some kind of movement and magic that AI brings. But I still need to find that balance. I'm not happy with what I've created so far in terms of AI experimentation. So how women are shown and how were they shown in history? Women were always shown as visuals to be appreciated. Women were always shown as beauty because beauty sells, one. Beauty is itself thought of as an achievement. If a woman is beautiful, then she's thought that she has achieved everything. She doesn't need to achieve more, and that's a strange idea. And that's the same mentality which feeds into why Barbie is being sold as a concept, right? And if I trace it back, my idea why I put women in uncomfortable situations in my visuals is so that, one, I can tell myself that yes, this is doable, right? Proving to my own self, because somehow the versions that you see in the paintings are somehow my own reflection. In a way, it's a self-portrait. Even if it's not directly my picture, it is a self-portrait. I think every painting is a self-portrait. This is my personal opinion on any artist's work. Whether it has a face or not, it is a self-portrait. Okay. So second thing is, why you see a lot of space, why you see a lot of caves and these kind of dark environments. Because women are not appreciated to go and explore those places. Right? If we talk about caves, if we talk about underwater, I don't think there are many scuba divers. There are not many astrobiologists. There are not many women who can go to the depths of the marine. There are women who are opting these careers, but still the awareness is less. Not many art forms are talking about it. And this is something on earth, right? This exploration. So the idea is not to just motivate women to go to the depths of ocean. That's not the idea. It's metaphoric. It's symbolic. It's to say that women can actually be in those areas of life which are uncomfortable and they can deal with it. It's just to create that metaphoric or symbolic reference. And that's why, because I worked with NASA, SpaceX, NASA Gene Lab and their scientists, personally have contacted a lot of people for interviews, especially Dr. Tara Rutley, who is now chief scientist of Blue Origin. And she was a NASA scientist as well. And I remember having some conversations with her. And she said that, she has struggled all her life to prove herself that she was worthy to be in even NASA. And now she's, working with, Blue Origin, which is a very good new company, new initiative for space. But even in NASA, she had a journey. She had to prove herself. And then she took on some initiatives related to marine biology and just to say that, okay, I really want to do it and I can do it. So, I mean, it's not about a South Asian woman anymore. It's about women in general, and they have to prove themselves that they can actually go and do it. And then we talk about the space flight, the space exploration. There are not many women astronauts. And there are white men who are astronauts and not many women, not even white women as astronauts. So the idea was to do the very extreme, to bring South Asian women. For us, space sciences is like far, far off. When we talk about NASA, then people say, oh, but we can never relate to those ideas. I wanted visuals that can at least start those conversations. I'm not saying these are relatable. I'm not saying my visuals are relatable. But to make them a bit relatable, what I did was, those were digital renditions. They were digital painted. I used references from truck art. I used different cultures and their meanings. Like, I created an entire series called Shared Space Culture. And the idea was, there is this shared space, which is the like literal meaning of shared space. And because space is still not explored, we are not in space. We are thinking about how to habitate the space, but we are not there yet. So we can think on a blank canvas how that space would look like for all the cultures. I mean, on Earth, we have all these demarcations, we have all these cultures, we have all these boundaries, we have map going on, and we know what are the boundaries for each countries. The culture here is different, the culture here is different. So how can we reinterpret space? And also then, because I'm a South Asian myself, I use that identity and I use that skin tone to represent my own culture, which is through the metaphors of truck art, through the metaphor of Thar and Thar women who are hard workers. So I took them to space with those visuals just to give them that due importance, like just to highlight them, but then also recontextualize them. So the idea was that whoever is seeing these visuals, they get a hint, this almost like a deja vu, like, okay, I've seen this visual somewhere, but something doesn't seem right. It's unsettling. Oh yes, the stars. I mean, that's not possible, right? So I want the viewer to be in that state of, okay, what's happening in this visual? Like, we see the culture going on, but then we don't understand why they are recontextualized. But this is the entire idea. You have to have that starting conversation. Now, my art is supposed to create that starting conversation, this almost like a third space where people can come and talk about this issue and say, oh yes, this is definitely something that we can talk about. If we can see it, then we can do it. So I think it's the same. I'm visualizing for the entire South Asian women in general. I want them to see this vision so that one day some girl can be inspired and she says that, yes, why can this business not start in space? I want to create visuals that are a visualization for everyone. And if not everyone, for a selected few, because in South Asian culture, we don't get to see such futuristic visuals. We only see very traditional stuff. And we say, oh, this is relatable because it looks like buildings are torn down, and it looks like Sadar, and it looks like, Empress Market. So this is relatable for us because this is Seaview. Now, this is something relatable. And how do you create the relatability? That's my entire question. So if I take those women, the real women of different cultures, and recontextualize them in a space environment, then at least their brains will think that this is possible for us. And then from there, the conversation starts, okay, but then is there a system here or no? But those are the questions for the later. I want it to be a communication or a dialogue initiator, my art. And this is the entire reason why I started this project, and it's an ongoing project. And there was a separate series which I did for the Turkish culture as well, where I was using the references of Turkish culture and then doing the exact same thing, bringing new environments and all. And this was way before AI. So it's an ongoing project. And of course, AI has helped a lot in the visualization, but I really enjoyed the collaging element, the painting element, and bringing the new side of the culture alive. So I think that's very important, because culture is almost like an evolving thing. It's not stuck. People think, okay, this is culture because this sounds more relevant, but culture is evolving. So I really wanted to question what culture is, what relatability is, and then create something that can be unsettling, but at the same time uncanny, familiar. So I wanted to work on this series, that's why. So to be able to deal with people who are just like nosy and they just want to ask questions for the sake of asking, I would say let them do their job. They are not actually doing or asking such questions like journalists or whoever to perhaps maybe pin you down, because they are doing their job of creating spicy information that goes viral on the internet. They are not creating information or content that can help you motivate. becoming something you want to. They have an entire different agenda altogether. Their agenda is that you get confused, and if you get confused, you give a reaction to something, then it becomes trendy on the internet. That's all. And they know that there are certain tricks that if you have a famous person in front of you, you have an opportunity to get views. And if you have an opportunity to get views, you have an opportunity to create a platform that works, that gets monetized. So they don't think about all these things. They don't think about the depth. What they would ask is purely driven by this angle that we want to create something spicy that goes online and people come to our platform and give us a follow. So they don't have any depth going on. So we can let them do their job. They are just doing their job, I would say. So the role of brain is quite deeper than it looks like. Our brains are not actually a hard drive. It's more like a museum, a living museum, you can say, where you have to constantly shift things, you have to constantly add things. Just imagine there are 86 billion neurons firing thoughts. So you have the opportunity there. Our neurons are firing thoughts all the time. And that's why we get overwhelmed by our own thoughts. Even if there is not a stimulus, there's not an external stimulus around us, our brains are enough to create that overwhelming effect for us because we are thinking so much. Now just imagine the overall possibility to reimagine, redirect, and reinvent your thoughts. Because I think human brain is the most underestimated resource that we all have. We don't know the power of it. And in order to do that, we have to first think about the way our thoughts are aligned. Once our thoughts are aligned with our vision, let's say the daily thoughts you're thinking, 86 billion neurons are working. Now they have a direction. Now they have a very clear direction where they need to put their ideas at. Now you have an army working for you. Before, they were just thinking random stuff because obviously brains are supposed to think. That's how brains are designed. Now, when you are realigning, you are giving them a direction. Once they have a direction, they know where to go. This is the power where you are unfolding everything. Where when thoughts are aligned with your vision, and then vision helps you move forward. And if your brain is, thinking about something, the possibilities and the probabilities are just higher that your body is going to react on top of it. Because if it's in your mind, then your body just follows. And even more, if you want a perfectly engineered way of going about things, then a system that works even better than this is that if your mind is thinking too much, you don't understand how to go about this, the random thoughts are coming to you, you're getting overwhelmed, how to deal with it? What you do is, first of all, you find a way to declutter your life. See in your environment what needs to change. That can help you redirect your thoughts. It's a cycle. It's a vicious cycle. How you do that? For example, if you want to do yoga or if you want to go to gym. But what are the hurdles? You have to minimize on the hurdles. And you have to create more reasons for the success. You have to create more reasons why you need to succeed. The big why, you need to have many whys. Like if you want to go to gym, why? Not just, okay, I want to be fit. No, this is not a good enough reason. You need to have many whys so that you can come back to it again and again. Second thing is, you have to see if your environment, if you say, okay, I'm not going to go to gym, I'm going to start workout at home. So what is the struggle? Struggle is you have to go and pick your mat, you have to go and pick your weights, it's in another room, this is in another room, and then your outfit is in some third room. First of all, create an environment where everything is at one place. Now the struggle is less. Now, when you think about all the whys and why you want to achieve it, one, the struggle is less, so most likely you are going to do it. Because it's easier, it's decluttered, your life doesn't feel like a bigger hassle, you have created less struggle for yourself. Secondly, if you are trying to quit, you have enough reasons. So it becomes easier. So I think this is the way you overpower. Now, when the body is given enough room where the declutter is less, automatically when the body moves, brain gives a signal, okay, this is happening. Brain is in the present now. Brain is not thinking and projecting in the future anymore. Brain is like accepting. Because brain, I told you, brain can be dumb and brain can be the most intelligent. So you have to see what works what works for you. So it's like this relation between body and mind. If you understand how it works, then you take the command. We think the brains are the thinking systems, but our bodies also have the brain of their own. And if you move your body in the direction of your whatever goal that you're trying to achieve, wherever you want to go, then the brains follow. So it's like a constant to and fro process. In fact, I actually use this process, or I've like discussed this in my recent research that I'm working on. And it talks about how different ideas, now this is not an easy idea, because there are many things, many researches, many inventions in biology that I got inspired by, like, cellular biology, and then the way immunity works. Very deep topics. And then I thought, how can I create something in my language, in my medium, which is art, which is, paintings or videos, to talk about those in a very layered manner or maybe direct manner. But then, it's not that easy, because, hardcore facts, you have to create fiction out of facts. It's not easy. How do you balance? Where does it end? How do you call it a documentary? Do you call it a film? All these questions you get in your mind as a technical process of the work. So I've researched a lot. And in those researches, actually, I've understood a lot about the brain, how it functions, how our the certain centers, they open up and they move in that direction because we have allowed our environment to help us. Most of the times when people are unable to achieve their goals, it's because their environment is decluttered. It's cluttered and we have to declutter it. So most of the times it's because of that. Once the access is there, you don't have to do the thinking. Your default mode gets on. It's just like breathing. We don't have to make an effort to breathe. So to achieve that, stage of yourself, you have to allow yourself to try and test, to see what environment works for you, what doesn't work for you, what you have to remove, what you have to add, what is taking you towards your dream goal, what is taking you towards your future self, and what is not. So it's like a constant audit of your life. If you're not doing the constant audit of your life, then you don't know. Now, this new research that I talked about, the biological references, and how I'm creating something based on my different knowledge management systems that I've created in my own mind. How am I going to go about that? There's no specific and straightforward answer, but there are certain systems that work. Now, because I understand that knowledge is accessible, knowledge is everywhere. So who is going to win in this decade or next generation? It's not the people who know the most. It's the people who have designed the systems that govern that knowledge. So I'm making those systems for the things that matter to me. Now, how does one create a system? A knowledge management system can be designed keeping some principles in mind, very basic principles, and then it depends on how you want to address it. One way to do it, it's the roadmap, how you think about one thing leading to other, and then you reverse engineer on it. Other people do some mind maps and they're like, okay, we get this visual, what we're trying to achieve. Now let's focus and filter more and see what works. Then the third way how you go about this is that you create almost like a listicle, which I think is the most simplest. Anyone can do it. Create a listicle and try to, stay very goal oriented. The only issue with that is that our brains are now firing a lot of defense mechanism. They're just like, why is this listicle created? And it, in fact, our brains make an effort to stop us from achieving it. Now, suddenly, if you have a list, what would be tempting for you? The tempting thing would be to just on the music and sit. Because the brain is in a hyper state. Brain is like, why you are putting so much pressure on me? Why you are telling me to achieve this in this time? I am not ready for it. So the knowledge management system, how they work at their best is when you allow yourself space and you do the deep work. Deep work is when you give yourself 20 minutes time or 30 minutes time, and then you don't let your brain overpower you. You say that there is a code that is fit in me, that is going to work, and then you just work. You think like you were a robot who was given one task and who's just going to work. You're not going to think. You're not someone who's allowed to think. Because once you start thinking, then thinking doesn't stop. So knowledge management system, they go hand in hand with your deep work. They go hand in hand with all of these things. But keep in mind, don't try to create a very specific listicle or goal, because the only danger with that is if you don't achieve it, then you're going to feel like a failure, and next time most likely you're not going to do this. You're going to waste your time. So in a day, try to do 2 to 3 hours of deep work. So a few sessions of deep work within those 2 to 3 hours. This will allow you to, one, use your time efficiently. Secondly, even if some things are left, you can take it to the other day. But your brain already knows what are the important things. So it would try to do them on its own. Once you put it on the autopilot, once you have told it there is nothing to worry about, there are no hazards, brain is feeling safe and sound. Brain is told to do as it wants to do, but we are doing the deep work. That's when your nerves calm down, and you can actually work for longer hours. And now, because you are building back your attention span, which is being lost because of our useless scrolling, because of our useless content consumption, now you're trying to build it back. This method actually helps you to build back your lost attention span, because you are allowing yourself to do the deep work without giving a goal orientation. If you put a goal, then it's again the adrenaline rush. Why this is not happening? Dopamine hits. Don't do that. Keep yourself focused for certain sessions and then see the result. You don't even have to put it on the brain, I need to achieve it. No, you are just telling the brain, let's enjoy this. Let's enjoy this task. Let's appreciate and be grateful that you are alive. You are feeling safe, and just be grateful. And then with that mentality, when you're giving time and interest to that task, then it automatically things will happen. You don't have to think. Things will happen for you. Okay, so when we talk about the way space operates and what are the projects that can govern the space, because space is a very scientific field. Most of the people think that there isn't much that can be done when it comes to cross sections of space, art, and technology. But one of my projects actually taught me that this is in fact doable, and there's a lot of potential in pursuing something that is relevant to a scientific community, and it's also relevant to a very creative community, and also relevant to social impact community. People who think that it brings some message, it brings some social impact, or it can address the bigger issues of the world at large. So you can do all of these things, or at least try to cater to all these different fields. So the project that I worked on related to James Webb Space Telescope was in 2023. I was researching the entire journey of the telescope, how the telescope was made, because before that there was Hubble telescope, and Hubble telescope could actually record certain things but could not record certain things because of the resolution limitations that were on it. And therefore, when James Webb Space Telescope came, it was a big thing for the space community. So they celebrated that now they can see what's happening in the space far off. More light years can be covered with obviously better ranges in microscope. So it was a huge invention. And I remember I was researching on it, and I got this idea. I was like, everyone is celebrating the telescope. Everyone is celebrating the kind of images the telescope can make. But what about the journey of the people who were actually have been working on the telescope itself, and the way the journey has moved on from the prototype to the final thing when it was launched in the space. So it was floating in around the Earth, but how was it made? How did that happen? So I started researching on its overall journey, and I got inspired. I was, seeing the facts. So I created a very surreal looking artwork, almost symbolic of the prototype. There was a robot. At that time, there weren't robots, but I added a robot because I foresee where it's moving next from here, but then also talking about where it came, where the idea was originated. So I was in a way giving tribute to the community of James Webb Space Telescope and people who obviously made it happen. So I think it was a huge thing. I created that work of art in collaboration with Dr. Tara Rutley, and she gave her voice to that artwork. And we later on, in collaboration with Project Mallet and NASA Gene Lab, Dr. Joseph Bogue, we actually sent that to space. And that was a huge milestone because Project Mallet 2 was heading to space. So the artwork went to space. Now, what is the need of sending an artwork to space? Someone can actually ask this. And I've been asked this a lot. So one thing that we need to understand is when we send stuff to space, this in itself is a huge achievement, because we don't just send anything to space. It's very calculated. Now, whether it's some experiments from NASA, whether it's music, whether it's some digital file, we're not sending off stuff that is useless. So they do keep this almost like a quota for each department. Like, we have to send something creative, we have to send something to related to healthcare and advance that, we have to send something for chemical engineering, we have to send something for by young students who are working at NASA, who are developing something new. So we have to keep like a balance. And they sent projects which have a potential, and they saw that I've been working on a very research oriented project, which is like space art series. And when they got to know more, Dr. Joseph Boger and all these people who were in charge of designing this CubeSat in collaboration with Ice Cubes and sending it off. So they discussed with me and they asked my vision. So I explained them how the same series where I'm giving tribute to like women and women empowerment, I'm talking about multiple women representation through their skin tones and colors. And at the same time, I'm also thinking about the inventions itself. I'm thinking about the way the invention was made. And therefore, for the first time, I'm doing something for the community. Like, in a way, the artwork was supposed to give tribute to the in the industry which has helped in doing all of that. So they loved this vision and they were like, we're going to send this. And it's because they found this balance of science, the inspiration for people at space. Because at the same time, when we think about space exploration, we think about one day when mankind will feel much comfortable to go to space. We would not just want to see very regular, very monotonous astronaut suits in white. I mean, that was something that we saw in Interstellar, but we're way past it. We would like to see some colors, some cultures represented. If we plan on habiting the place, if we want to not just explore the space, but we think about space as a second home, then we have to think about cultures, we have to think about choices, then we have to think about how to create variations and how to create interest in space. And when I thought about all these things, then yes, I went into spacesuit design. I went into studying deeply the inventions of the space, and to bridge them, I created certain artworks, which has now turned into a full-fledged project that I've launched by the name of Shared Space Culture, where I invite an audience, and I'm building a community that can talk about these bigger ideas. Because I think this is not just me. I think if more people are motivated, there are people who would love to be part of this discussion, where scientists can talk with artists can have a discussion with engineers, and they can all come and collaborate and inspire each other. So the idea was to build this community, and through this community, I want to engage with projects that are which have this foresight to work on projects that are for the betterment of space, and that can bring opportunities to people, especially women of South Asia, to do something in space studies and later on go for missions in space exploration. So why not? I think this is definitely doable. It's all about a vision. When you see a vision, I have seen this vision. If you see a vision, then it can happen. And now it's just one person. I have seen this vision, but I think this is definitely doable. And if there is a community that is supporting this initiative through motivational speeches, through artworks that show that, through discussions that motivate and encourage more women and young girls in school on that, then this is definitely doable. So it starts with an engaged community. And once we have an engaged community, we can do bigger projects. So you know how a simple visualization can lead you to something bigger. I think I've learned this, staying and working on this project has made me realize that this is definitely doable. And I would love to create opportunities where not just artists, but very specific subjects within the science, like someone working on marine biology, the knowledge that they have, because they work on the sense of weightlessness, because we are floating in water. The same sensibilities apply to someone who is in the microgravity environment. That research is somewhat similar. So they can have better understanding of both environments. So how do we create these kind of opportunities for people who want to go into the research departments, who want to create something not just functional, but also inspiring. So it creates opportunities for all the people from different fields interacting in different departments. And important thing here is to have the discourse. So if we are not having the discourse amongst ourselves, then we can never reach there, because these kind of things require that two industries coming together. Science community appreciating art and art community appreciating science through the lens of space. And then we can create more technical grounds where the real ISS, which we already did through my last project, we were in contact with the International Space Station, which was also connected with the metaverse. So we could link our research and we could upload it directly to International Space Station, and we could speak to the scientists and astronauts who are at the International Space Station, and they can actually join in our sessions on metaverse and give lectures to someone, let's say in Saudi Arabia, or places where science initiatives are not taking the first seat. So we are making those bridges and trying to connect the audience that can appreciate in much depth, basically. The only concern that public schools have when we say that let's add space sciences, they're like, but what are students going to do? When we teach them space sciences, what kind of jobs they're going to get? My question to them is, what are students doing after learning physics? They are not becoming scientists. They are not doing anything with the theory of relativity or word problems, or something with algebra. Algebra is useless in my sense, although it has uses, but for most of the students. And then chemistry, so they can be taught space sciences. Why not? Space is so inspiring, it's a better subject. So space law, spacesuit design, space medicine, everything, all the different fields that we have on Earth, they are going to be applicable for space. So imagine how many subjects there are: space architecture, space law, space medicine, space nutrition. Everything is different. So something to look forward to, definitely doable. I think we should be doing this.